Somebody else March 25th and 27th.
Sorry, those online, I learned that our audio may not have been working. So we're doing oral updates right now, oral communication and member updates. If anyone else has updates they want to share about their work. Okay, we'll move on. We will skip approval of minutes because we don't have a quorum yet and move on to executive director's report. Go ahead, Mom.
Morning, everyone, and happy 2025. Yeah, it's already been an auspicious beginning to 2025. I just wanted to share with you a couple of updates here. You'll see some new faces. Keep bringing folks in and figuring out our sort of our team, but just wanted to make you all aware that we have right now a couple folks in the room. Michael Clark left the department a couple months ago. Rich Nixon here, who comes from Robert Half Consulting, who served as interim controllers and CFOs across a number of other also housing agencies and other types of companies. We're thrilled to have Rich join us on an interim basis until we can do a fuller recruitment to backfill Michael. So welcome, Rich.
Thank you.
And this is our housing advisory committee. These are all housing experts across our county. And then also joining the finance team is our budget manager, Mersada Gill, who joins us from OHSU. And has already jumped right in and wrangling our budget. So it's going to be some newish people going through and figuring out where all the money is. So I know we've had a lot of conversations here, and we've been continuing to improve our dashboard work and getting metrics around our performance. This is more of a Mersada and Rich are we're in the throes of budget frankly right now. So what we're hoping to do is this year we're hoping to try to, as much as we can, parallel track some of the housing authority parts of the budget, because we have to do the staffing as part of the county budget. So we will be coming back to you all on some of those budget themes in the next couple months, but just bear with us because we have new finance staff just trying to figure things out. And last but not least, we have Jacob Boyette took a new job for this with the city of Hillsborough, and a great promotional opportunity comes from Nancy Romero, backfilling for Jacob. Nancy comes from also on an interim basis. Yeah. So sort of a little learning curve and trying to help us support everyone. So along those same lines, I just wanted to highlight. I feel like since we all convened and we had updates, so I'm not going to go through all the things from in the director's report. I did want to highlight a couple things though that we have moved forward on 2 transitional housing projects in an access center. So we continue to build out the full continuum of shelter and housing options here in Washington County. One area that we felt had some pretty major gaps in these systems. For those of you who've been around a while, a few decades, back in the day, HUD did a lot of transitional housing with their continuum of care funding. And then that really shifted over the last, I'd say, decade or so, focusing more on any new money towards permanent supportive housing. So what we have recognized is that with the supportive housing services resources, we have that flexibility to help fill that gap. So we did fund 2 projects, so we moved forward with that, and those works were provided last winter, or just in December. And building out an access center, so a place for folks to go shower and have a meal and get connected with housing navigation and other services. And we're working towards building out those sort of services sprinkled dispersed throughout the county as well. We're also gearing up for our, I believe every other year we do a point in time count. Generally, it's always the end of January. So that's again happening with our homeless services side division. Working towards that. It's always an indicator of what we've seen trend lines in the last 3 years. We've seen a decrease, it's almost a 36% decrease in unsheltered homelessness. But we've also seen an increase in sheltered homelessness, which we actually see as a good sign that people are going from unsheltered to then sheltered. So we're not, the question is, yeah, we're very interested in seeing the results this time around and how that trend line is, whether it continues. And we did have to open up a shelter just the last few days. So that is trying to be responsive in that community. And last but not least, you guys, if you get a chance after this meeting to go to our public services building, we have a photo exhibit that we partnered with Engage as well as Metro, and we worked with our residents at Terrace Glen. That's an affordable housing project. Are you guys? Melissa actually can share more about that work. We worked with the residents to. Do you want to share a minute or two?
Sure. I also should have mentioned BNF is not here. BNF's on vacation, and so I'm covering for BNF. Terrace Glen is a property that serves a variety of households, right? But they really focus on both the family and the seniors and people with disabilities. And they partnered with Engage Northwest to offer a photo exhibit, a photo workshop for households who lived there. And so people had the chance to work with a professional photographer who taught them sort of, finding their vision, their view, and their voice. And they created a photo exhibit that has now traveled, I think, to 3 different places. So it was shown in Portland for a while, and now it's actually in PSB, our public services building across the street. And it features photos taken by the residents of the building and kind of their take on what home is. That was the theme, is what means home to them. So it's really cool. It's really fun. I like stuff like that.
Yeah, it was really inspiring. Just giving them a chance to reflect on what that particular home also means to them at Terrace Glen, and be able to have housing that they can afford and build their families there. So I just want to take a moment, in the week of Martin Luther King Day, as well as the Transfer of Power Queen Day, just that there's a lot of things changing in our ecosystem, in our environment, nationally, internationally, and then of course locally. And so it's hard to know how this will all unfold, other than we have dealt with this 8 years ago, where we got to see some of the very racist practices from the Trump administration affect our local community. So we will need to prepare ourselves, and just wanted to recognize that we will need to work with you and think about ways that we will, of course, respond at the local level, and ways to not advance those racist policies. A lot of things happening quickly. We do know there could be budgetary challenges ahead at the federal level. We're also going to be talking in a few minutes about some of the latest on the Supportive Housing Services Measure reform, and just recognize that there will be, we're going to be heading into a constrained environment. A lot of us are facing it, a lot of governments are facing budget shortfalls. We're facing our own on the Supportive Housing Services side, and we need to prepare for some federal disinvestment. Luckily, we have great local strong programs. We have moving to work, some flexibility with our hub resources, and we are on a path to still create homeownership opportunities with our Section 18 work, and hopefully create more housing for disadvantaged BIPOC households as much as possible. With that, we'd be open to any questions.
So, it's always hard, but so as a relative budget stuff, that's what I was focused on. But, so I know you've done a lot of like streamlining, a lot of, critical thinking around your budget, looking for savings and more efficiencies, but I don't know if this is anticipatory or not, but are you being asked sort of looking forward, or start looking for possibilities where, less efficient programs that you might like say this, we devote so much resources to this, but this takes a lot of resources, but we're not going to pay for it at the same level. Not that you want to come down now, but you're sort of doing anticipatory, sort of like making a list of the things you need to react to the next 12 to 24 months you can, and to be ahead of it opposed to reactionary.
We will need to create a series of different scenarios. John, I would say right now the county at the general fund level is experiencing enough compression for Measure 550 that the county is going through their budget process and coming up with 10%, 13%, and 17% cut scenarios. So that is significant. At the county level. We are fairly insulated from that. We get very little general funds, or what we're like 99% special purpose funds, so federal, state, and regional funds. So we are still waiting. We're still in continuing resolution with our HCV, our housing choice voucher, and our federal investments. And we are waiting to see how the House of the Senate, and frankly, we're assuming it's going to be Secretary Scott Turner, who is going through his verification. What's that called? Confirmation hearings right now, and what's fascinating is he's saying we need more housing writ large. We have a national shortage, and we actually want to protect fair housing. And so we will. There's a lot of unknowns. Right. So we don't want to overcorrect, but right now we are facing the biggest shortfalls right now, frankly, on the supportive housing services side, with our home services program. So. Generally, I like to think we're looking at continuous improvement, looking at efficiencies. So, year in, year out, I like to say that, but we did make some reductions last year that we're now sort of realizing some of the savings coming in. So we will.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Well, we're going to move backwards. We have a quorum now, so we will move back just a step to the approval of our October minutes. Leona provided those minutes in the email. Can I get a motion? First, I'll ask, does anyone have any amendments or concerns about the October minutes? No. Okay. Can I get a motion to approve the October 23rd, 2024 minutes? Thank you. Can I get a second? Thank you. We will now hold a vote on the motion to approve October 23rd, 2024 minutes. All those in favor say aye or raise your hand. Aye. Perfect. Any opposed? Nope. Okay. Those motions are approved at 9:21 a.m. The second action we have on our calendar today is to confirm the 2025 Housing Advisory Committee calendar. That also was included in the meeting packet, and it does follow the standard month that we usually do. I believe no meeting in June, I think, and then forum hopefully in October this year. Any questions or discussion on the 2025 calendar? No. Okay. Can I have a motion to approve the 2025 PAC calendar?
Move to approve it.
Thank you. Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Ready for a vote on that motion? All those in favor say aye. Raise your hand. Okay. Any opposed? Thank you, Nathan. Any opposed? Our calendar is also hard to be two people. So I will now pass it over to me for the staff liaison update, which BNF has helpfully provided notes for me. A few updates today. One of the things that we are hoping to tackle in 2025 is a review of the bylaws of the Housing Advisory Committee bylaws. The last time bylaws were reviewed was in 2015. So we are very due for review and probably an update. As part of that process, we're hoping to get input from HAC members to sort of determine the best way to move through this. So BNF has sort of two thoughts on this. We could have staff bring revisions to the group, bring revisions to the committee, sort of recommendations, and then gather input that way. Or if there are folks who would rather be more involved at the creation of the revisions and that review portion, kind of the front end, we can do that if there are one or two folks who would like to meet more regularly with BNF to review those bylaws and recommend revisions. Does anyone have thoughts on which you'd prefer?
I think it can go either way, but if you need assistance, reach out. Have a reach out.
Great.
Especially the chair.
Yeah, great.
Now we have
Yes.
two, yeah.
Any other feedback on that? Okay, sounds good. I think I probably will have BNF reach out at least to you and Melinda to talk that through. And then this will be kind of an ongoing thing, at least for the Housing Authority Board of Directors. It took us like 8 months. So it's a lengthy process. Super fun too. My second update is recruitment, HAC recruitment. We will begin the process of interviewing for new Housing Advisory Committee members next month, probably early next month. We're currently recruiting for 5 new members. 2 of those positions are at large. 1 position representing finance, 1 position representing veterans or work with veterans, and then 1 representing urban or regional planning. If there is anyone you know who might be really interested, please send their information to BNF, and she will work with them to make sure that they have the opportunity to get signed up and part of that process. We are this time, interviews to begin in February, and co-chairs will be part of that interview process, and BNF will reach out with more information. And then my last update is, BNF said to grab the gift if you weren't able to attend the annual luncheon in December, but I'm realizing now I don't know where I left those. So don't grab those. I'm sorry. They will be there. Oh, we have them. Was there anyone who wasn't perfect? Okay. Just 2. Were you?
Yeah.
Perfect. Just 2. We're good. Thank you. Oh, thank you for saving me, Nancy. The parking pass is the other thing. Who needs a parking pass? 4 parking passes. Do you have the parking passes? Oh, thank goodness for Nancy. One less person I have to be.
That's what
That's the real value. Oh, thank you. You and 1 for you. Thank you. And then as a last reminder, the Housing Advisory Committee adheres to public meeting laws. We do record our meetings and those recordings are viewable to the public. We want to provide that friendly yearly reminder. That is it for my liaison updates from BNF. Any questions? Yeah, go
I
ahead.
have one question.
Yeah.
The description of the who was
Yes.
working on that.
That's a good question. We usually provide, so I'll ask BNF to track on that flyer and share it with the committee. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Back to the other person I was thinking. We don't have any ongoing business today, so we will move to new business, and I am the SHS Metro update.
Don't know me. I'm Erin Boyle. I'm the Senior Government Relations Manager for Washington County, and I have been our government relations person on the SHS here, and it's going to be another review. I will try to keep this as concise as possible, but I'm happy to answer questions to the extent that I have answers to anything in particular. But for those of you who don't know, there's been about a year-long conversation going on about the potential to reform the current tax measure that Metro passed in 2020 and came into effect in 2021 to provide revenue for supportive housing services. So it's an income tax that is placed on high income earners as defined in that ballot measure every tax year. And that money then gets split between Metro and 3 counties to provide services to what are called population A and population B. But those are the chronically homeless, and then those who are becoming chronically homeless. So this is a really important resource that we leverage to move people from unsheltered to sheltered to permanently sheltered. And the conversation has been kind of focused on 2 separate pieces. One is the tax rate and how much revenue we're bringing in, and 2, how we're spending and governing that revenue structure. So through those conversations, the way it was initially started was a desire to look at what resources were available to continue the regional investment in affordable housing. They brought together a regional housing stakeholders table. And from there, they said, we don't want to do another property tax, which is how we paid for the last bond measure, which is different than an income tax. Because we would have to, it would be an additional one, which is burdensome and not popular right now. We'd have to magically find a money tree in the basement of somewhere, which has proven to be really bad logic so far. Or we can look at the supportive housing services or SHS tax revenues and reapportion them. But the reading that Metro's general counsel, so their lawyer, has is that currently the SHS measure does not allow for investment in the construction, preservation, acquisition of affordable housing projects. So that opened up the broader conversation. And so this will walk through what Metro Council discussed last Thursday. My understanding is they're still talking about it this Thursday, but we'll get into what they may or may not be doing right as we speak in a little bit. But so I'll go through this as quickly as possible, and I will hit the next slide.
And this is really slow and confusing, so it's going to take me a few seconds.
That's fine. So Metro is discussed two ordinances. One, which would be a referral to reform the current SHS measure, and the second was about more details about what actual changes will be made programmatically that don't have to be included in the ballot measure. So this first section is about the referral measure. So this is what will go to the voters and essentially make changes that are required because it would reform things that exist in the current ballot measure structure. So the first thing is their statement of purpose and findings. This is truncated from 2 paragraphs into 1 sentence, so it's super concise, but it's to authorize the use for affordable housing, quote, increasing program oversight, quote, simplifying governance, and then extending the sunset of the measure, which is a really big deal because it makes it more possible to finance against it to 2025. 2050. This year is 2025. I am a little tired. So yes, to 2050. So that's a significant extension. The section 3 really clarifies that statement that the purpose is to authorize the use for affordable housing. States it is now usable for affordable housing, And what's really important to note is this is a really broad definition of use for affordable housing. It's not just construction, it's also land banking, it's also preservation, it's rehabilitation. What you think of as building affordable housing it's much broader than that. So I personally, and our board will tell me later, believe that this is a good definition of affordable housing if we are going to extend this measure to cover that. Next slide. But it gets trickier from there for us as a county and as implementers of the SHS ballot measures intention. Section 4 does two things. It extends the tax rate to 2050. And then it calls for a reduction of the maximum tax rate. Currently, the rate is set as 1%. 1%, thank you. This is numbers in my head are never a good plan. 1% of the income of taxable, your tax rate is 1% if you're over the threshold, and as defined in the current measure. What this says is that 1% is going to come down sometime in the future to a rate as yet unknown. So they're literally because they are draft ordinances. This is obviously not something you send to the ballot and be like, we're just gonna do some stuff later. But their intention was to have that conversation today, but not sure how that's going. So this would inherently reduce the amount of revenue that's pulled in year to year, but with the extension does increase the amount of money over time. So they were going to have a conversation about what that tax rate would be and what tax year that would take effect, given that they're extending it. Currently, the final tax year reflection is 2030. 2030. Okay, so just taking, maybe I've yet to get a number right today. So Section 5 is reforms the governance structure. In the current ballot measure, there is a requirement for two committees to exist. One is called the SHS Oversight Committee. The second is the Tri-County Planning Body, or TCPB. Those are called for in the ballot measure. So in order to walk away from them or reform them in any way, or actually reduce them into one, they have to have permission from the voters to do that. So and in addition, neither SHS Oversight or the Tri-County Planning Body have any call for expertise in the housing world. So what has been proposed by Metro is what some of us call the H2 PAC, some people call the HH PAC, a bunch of us call too big of an acronym. But essentially it's the Housing and Homelessness Policy Advisory Committee that would then create both the regional goal setting role that TCPB plays and the oversight that the SHS Oversight Committee currently has. The ballot referral ordinance does not have details. Those come in the secondary ordinance. But basically, they would establish a committee by September 2025 in hopes to transfer current roles and responsibilities from the existing committees into H2 PAC by the end of 2025 if the ballot measure passes. And it gives H2 PAC a pretty significant run of the things that they have to do. And then Metro is the body that then gets the recommendations from H2 PAC and implements based on those recommendations. So H2 PAC would look at what our regional key performance metrics should be, what our outcomes should be, what rules and obligations counties and then the contracting partners would have to abide by. And they would then also be, Metro would also then be required to look at H2 PAC every 3 years at a minimum to make sure that they're meeting the roles and effectiveness that they would like to see out of that committee. Next slide. Section 6 calls for a new document or a new plan for the region called the Regional Housing and Homelessness Action Plan. I don't have a creative way to say this acronym, so good luck to all of us. But essentially, this is where there would be a regional look at what the key performance metrics, programs, who we should be prioritizing. Currently, that's POP A, those chronically homeless, hardest to serve, with that have conditions that make it really challenging for them to move out of homelessness without ongoing long-term support. And then setting up principles for the highest use of funding, available resources and strategies for success, both for services and for affordable housing. And then when I don't know what something is, I put it in quotes to directly quote from the draft ordinance, but it would be adopted by Metro and then updated periodically. I don't know what that period is. And that then becomes the guiding documentation for those of us who are what are called implementing partners. So next slide. This is where governance gets even more detailed in this referral. And there's an error on the slide that it's fun. So first, we currently have a local implementation plan for SHS measures. This would require an update to that local implementation plan so that we would be in compliance with the new regional plan. And this is the second bullet is where the error is. It's not the LIP is approved annually, but an annual work plan has to be approved annually before the county would receive the funds, which means that we don't know we have funds until we get that approval, and the timing of everything that we currently do with our annual work plans and our budgeting would be drastically shifted. So it's not the LIP that's approved annually. Sometimes you read for detail and sometimes you switch plan for partner and it's fine. The other thing that is a new compliance technique that Metro wants to bring on board is that we would have to maintain our compliance with Metro's adopted metrics, reporting, data collection, or we would risk our funding. In addition, we would have to do different types of reporting, presumably. We do a lot of reporting to Metro at this point in time under the current ballot measure. We do quarterly, annual. We do quarterly. We do quarterly reports and an annual report. And we provide data back to them. We're working through the data sharing process. It's been a very challenging negotiations. Almost done, maybe. I don't know. One word away from getting it right, apparently. But in addition to the current reporting that we do at the regional level, this would require us to provide data related to our federal, state, and local funding sources, which is never information we've had to provide to Metro as part of this. This
and really any other funder. Not like HUD is asking us, requiring us to demonstrate our local. It's a precedent setting required.
And could be very administratively intensive if not done in a mindful way where we could just hand them the report we hand to HUD when we hand it to HUD. The intention that has been stated by Metro counselors around this is they don't know the world. This is not their job. They don't do what you guys do and sit in this space and talk with Molly on a monthly basis about what our broader picture looks like. And so they want us to report that in so they can put the regional funds into context. I have thoughts. Next slide. And then section 8 is really unclear because it says that Metro, after H2PAC makes recommendations, would adopt a tax funding allocation structure. And I am not sure what tax funding allocation means. That's usually you do a revenue allocation. And we don't know if that means changing from county to county. Under the current structure, we receive about a third of the funds that go to the counties. Multnomah County receives about 45%, and the remainder goes to Clackamas. And that is based on the estimated amount of taxes that are accrued because of taxpayers within our county. So it's like the Washington County taxpayers put the money in, they get to see the resources. It's just their community. This could also, so it's a question of, do you mean geographic allocation, or is it an allocation that some goes to services and some goes to housing, which then all of this can then trigger from time to time a review of how much money Washington County gets and how we're allowed to spend it, which can put services and programs into question. But it's also literally, that sentence is just like 7 words short of what Metro wrote, so it's very unclear. Section 9 is a monitoring of the funds, and it's also, again, an administrative burden, potentially. I mean, we have records, we share records. This would also push that records request down to service providers. And this would be turned over to Metro to make sure we're in compliance. And if we don't provide all the records that they ask for, we could see corrective measures up to and including the loss of funds. And then section 10 is about auditing. It requires annual reports on the expenditures and impacts to the metrics. So what did we spend and how did it change the key performance metrics? I think we kind of do that in our annual reports already, but maybe we don't. I don't know. I've read them. I seem to know what's going on and how much we've spent. And then the other new requirements would be an annual financial audit by a public accounting firm of the revenue and distribution of the revenue. I'm not sure if that trickles down to county annual financial audits or if that is strictly aimed at Metro's allocation of revenue. Either way, they need records and that's more administrative work for us. And then thirdly, it allows for performance audited by elected auditors for Metro and any of the county elected auditors. By the way, they already have permission to do those sorts of things. They don't need Metro's permission to audit. The Washington County auditor can audit Washington County programs. So thanks for that. Next slide. So that was the referral measure, and then I'll go even faster through the.
Why don't we pause
yeah.
for questions? Transition planning, we just start, I just want to open this up for, this is more information sharing with you all. This is not about position. But we want to make sure you're all aware of and a chance to ask up there questions because that's always
Energetic.
part.
It just sounds like Nathan.
Oh, can I go?
We can't hear Nathan. Oh, no. Hold on just a second. Nathan, can you hold just a second and we'll start with Ryan. Okay. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it sounds like there's oversight due to potential mishandling of funds elsewhere.
I think that what we have heard in those public settings is there is a lack of transparency, they believe, and that because there isn't transparency into these things, no one really knows, and therefore there's no accountability in that. I mean, I know that we do a lot of public budgeting and we do everything in public because there are laws if we don't. But some people feel that there's a lack of clarity into why we're spending what we're spending and what we're getting for what we spend. I think that they want more information, and they think that the other thing is that the voters have indicated in some polling that there is a decreasing amount of trust that we are properly spending the dollars because they're not seeing their results in the streets the way they expected to in 3 years. And I think that varies from county to county. And I think that everyone is just looking for faster results than system building can really provide. That's Aaron Doyle's opinion. So please, that's not the position of Washington County, sort of. So I think that what they're looking for is ways to enhance the public trust in the process. And instead of doing better publication standards, we are looking at more administrative work, is Aaron's take.
I think I would just add to that. We provide pretty extensive detailed financial reporting, as Marshawn and Rich can now attest, it's multi-tabbed on a quarterly basis, lots and lots of information on how contracts are going. But I think there's been, first of all, they've changed the financial template a few times, so we're kind of constantly sort of trying to catch up with how we're reporting that information. We've never seen that information get summarized at the Metro level in a way that we have been able to really tell the broader story of where the investments have gone and what outcomes have come with that. Because the financial people are looking at the financial information, but then we provide programmatic updates as well, and we're doing annual updates, but the two are not meshing somehow. you know, and how that forward picture. And then you combine that with the amount of additional revenues that came in more than were initially projected. And so what was it getting in the media all the time was just this huge carryover amount of funds. So what's really been a difficult story to tell is the active allocation and commitments we have put into the community of that carryover fund. So they see a number that's just a fund balance that looks sizable, and it is sizable. But just like the bonds, you sell all the bond balance is very sizable. But then it takes 5 to 7 years to incrementally spend that funds down. So we have in 3 years spent or allocated or committed the full amount of our carryover funds, but that it's been a cognitive dissonance into how they're seeing our financial reports, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it's just this, like, no, we're actually putting it in contracts, doesn't mean it's all spent in one day. And so we've had to change, we've actually frankly had to adapt our own way of presenting the financials to make it clearer that you're actually getting the funds.
I have a question about the slide that, and is it referring to partners that the county partners with? And wanting to know how they do their things, and then if they don't like it, then you don't get funding? I mean, is that, that's how I was kind of reading?
Yeah, essentially, it's a great question. I think that they want to be able to pull records both from us and from service providers. Those are the partners, so service providers have to provide that record in. Because Metro doesn't currently give money directly to service providers, it would be the county's budgets that would be impacted if things aren't happening, which would then trickle to the service providers more likely than not. But yes, if the service providers, like I have 3 people and you're asking me to pull one of those people from providing client services to pull records for you, it's going to take me a minute. If that record delay could then be told you're not in compliance, we're pulling back we're holding your funds, that becomes a much bigger picture problem, but also puts a huge administrative burden on our service providers without a clear pattern of when that's going to happen. So it could just be at their request. They're like, we heard that Aaron Doyle's trust fund service provider is not spending their money in a way that they said they would. We want their records. And Aaron Doyle's service provider is like, I don't want to. Then the whole county could become held accountable.
I might have missed it. What's the expected implementation date of all this?
That we'll get to that in.
Okay.
That is one of the big questions. Yeah. Nathan, do you want to try again?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, sorry I couldn't be there today. There's so many questions I have. Just quickly, I want to share my perspective for the group. I think this is mostly being driven by Multnomah County and not anything Washington County's done. I've heard Lynn Peterson speak in public forums, and that's my impression that a lot of this is being driven by Portland and Multnomah County. I did have a couple of questions just to see if the staff can respond. There was a proposal. So first of all, you probably all saw last night that it seems like now this vote will be delayed until November. It seems like Lynn Peterson's indicating that. What happened? There was a proposal prepared by the 3 counties about this, in response to some of the earlier drafts. What happened to that proposal? Did Metro entertain it?
We presented it as a tri-county body at a postal meeting to a number of stakeholders. And we were told, thanks, this has been really productive and helpful. And that is the last meeting we had on that. I would also, being slightly less flippant, I do think some modifications have been made to what was originally being contemplated for this reform measure. And some of that does reflect some of the county's recommendations about how to go about this, but this draft ordinance is what we proposed as a potential path forward.
Mm-hmm.
And what we were asking for essentially was kind of some guarantees around being able to provide the services at the level that we have committed to, that basically reduces the number of cracks in the system that people can slip into. Be that, you know, we don't have enough outreach workers, so people don't get found, or if we have outreach workers, they get told they send someone somewhere where they can't actually receive services because we lack capacity, or they get stuck in shelter. All of those cracks, we were trying to baseline what the essential set of services and the rates at which they need to be paid out had to be. That was kind of one of our key components, and that there's no guarantee of services first that I have really felt was put forward in what has been proposed. So that's the biggest. And then the other pieces of it, there, you know, the counties do agree that if we could reduce the number of oversight committees and clarify roles and set, you know, those gold stars, this gold star, this is what we plan to do, statements more clearly for the public, we can answer some of those questions better in a more cohesive regional way. There are pieces that need change. It's 3 years of a brand new thing, and we're learning them, but we don't necessarily think the whole of the tapestry that we wove needs to be removed and replaced. But maybe one can be as better than two, so that there's those types of things. So that I don't know, I think that really answers your question with
Just curious. It does seem like the groups that wrote the letter, which is Here Together, Welcome Home, Portland Metro Chamber, and the Coalition of Communities of Color, are gonna get a chance to like make a proposal. So I read last night. So that would be interesting. I just have one more question. There's so many different things we could talk about here, but I am curious. It seems like, Aaron, what you presented is a lot more focused than I realized on Metro exerting its control over this funding and taking some discretion or some flexibility away from the counties. I just want to give voice to a couple of points for the committee to know. Metro is brand new at housing, and I just want to say that like I like some of the people at Metro, some of them are my friends, but they don't have the depth of expertise that at least Washington County and Multnomah County have on housing policy and housing and implementation of programs like this. My organization, Benestar, is a contractor with Washington County for some of these services. And we were recently approached by Metro about a direct grant opportunity for sort of training on PSH. And we're going to take a look at that. I was a little surprised that Metro is contemplating directly contracting with some of the providers in the system, not through the, Washington County. And I mean, I just sort of wonder where that's all going to go, because you're going to have Metro exerting, if this passes, much more control, it seems to me. And at least at this point, I would say they've hired a lot of people, but I don't see the level of sort of expertise that I see in Washington County, and I assume also at least in Multnomah County and some of these areas. So it's not really a question. I guess that's just like, I don't know if Molly, you would have any response to that, but that's a concern I have, that Metro is exerting a lot of control, and I would just say I don't think they have the staff chops at this point to do all the things that maybe they want to do, but that's just an opinion. So
I think this does introduce a level of blurriness and too much gray, in my opinion, around roles and responsibilities. Of who's administering which sort of contract. There's a lot of work that has happened between the Tri-County Planning Body and with the Oversight Committee to try to get clearer on, county is going to be the ones executing contracts when it relates to direct service delivery and client outbound. That's different than Metro taking on a regional, say, training and technical assistance approach. Generally, we do need to do a better job of syncing up and collaborating and sort of who's doing what. And part of the challenge is different ideas are coming from the counties and the county chairs, but then it takes Metro, a time. They're taking time to understand and digest and research what that thing is, where the counties have already moved forward and done those changes. And then they come and present things like a year later saying, hey, we're going to now take on pay equity. Well, the counties, they already dealt with that through the budget process. So then maybe there's definitely ways to look at these things more regionally. And so I would encourage you all, those who get, especially getting funding from SHS, to start echoing some of those themes, Nathan, that what you don't want is separate contracts with different, between Metro and the counties where there's overlap or duplication of that service. That's been our central to the position we've taken. We want the counties to understand the local needs of our community, what makes sense in terms of that balance of which investments we're doing, because Metro is one of their initial proposals was to kind of take back a very specific amount of SHS to go towards housing, and you do it in a competitive process. That was one of the things Aaron said that we saw a change. Well, hopefully they heard us around, wait a second, that's now, you're fragmenting the system even more unnecessarily. And why have partners like you, Nathan, compete for a capital project, but then now go to the counties to get the operating dollars? That makes no sense. Have it be one big solicit, a system that we can see it being the synergies between the long-term commitment and the short-term fight. But yes, I think there's a lot here for service providers to frankly highlight your experience and the challenges and the risks they're actually presenting for you as well as the counties.
It seems complicated. I mean, this is really complicated to put in front of voters. And I think that, public opinion about oversight is waning. In other words, I'd be surprised if voters lose confidence that additional oversight is motivation to approve a new measure. But I'm curious if there's been, it doesn't sound like it, but curious if there's been any discussion about impact related to what they propose in terms of the tax cut. I mean, are they thinking that the tax cut over time relates to the overall funds in the pool, or has that even been a discussion yet? It's just kind of out there that, hey, we need to do something to extend this to get voter motivation.
So there have been intermittently shared estimations of revenue impacts to the overall pool of money that's available at certain levels of tax rate reduction. So not necessarily been public conversations, or I will say it is also hard for us to project revenue impacts given the volatility of an income tax. An income tax is, of course, reliant on income reporting. And when you're talking high earners, those tax models get more flexible than your property tax valuation does. So a lot of those initial assessments were done on the 2023 revenue forecast, which was much more robust than the 2024 one for some of that specific information. Because there are two pieces of rate setting changes that have been contemplated, and I'll get into this a little bit more, but it's part of the conversation they were intending to have today. I was hoping we'll provide some clarity to those long-term impacts to the revenue pool that then gets divided out amongst the counties. But if we could try to do this transition so I can not get too far over my time, and then we'll talk a little bit about that specific thing in some of these other conversations. So the second ordinance that was drafted and under consideration is what they would do to transition from the current system to, if the ballot measure passes, the new system. So next slide. So obviously they would not put this, the transition doesn't happen if there's no new measure. If the measure doesn't pass or whatever, they wouldn't do any transition. Just be clear about that. But basically they would plan to have a plan by September 30th of 2025 if they go in May of 2025. And that transition plan is about how we move to a new set of regional metrics, new set of programmatic, what they call a program North Star. What is the goal? Because there's a lot of disagreement as to what the current goal is. Some people keep saying we're here to end homelessness. And while that is a noble goal, pragmatically, there isn't enough money in the system to do that. So maybe we need to reset some of our rhetoric. So in the interim time period before the H2 PAC can set itself up for decision-making or get set up for decision-making and start doing some regional thought processing, Metro becomes the one to adopt interim performance metrics and decide what that North Star, that outcome is supposed to be. And they would do it no later than July 31st, 2025, built on what is currently existing at the TCPB level. In addition, they would be working with stakeholders to map out a process by which they're going to do the work of setting new regional standards, outcomes, priorities, policies, and figure out what best practices should look like. H2 PAC then creates an interim allocation plan for the next fiscal year after the change in the measure, and has to present that to the counties and implementing partners no later than December 31st of 2025. But that's supposed to take on both services and affordable housing investments. Again, I will say that without knowing the numbers, it's really hard to know what's going to be available for affordable housing because, you know, we feel like what we have left over is $5 million across the region. That's a really different affordable housing conversation than we have $50 million across the region. You know, so setting standards based on reality is always fun. But they really do want to see the work of the TCPB continue forward. So they do plan to pull that through in this transition plan. And then starting in fiscal year 26-27, which our budget will be passed by June 26, we would be investing in both services and housing as a county, and facing new compliance standards and escalating corrective measures that would be put in place by Metro. Next slide. H2 PAC is further detailed here because they didn't want to put it in the ballot measure, which is actually quite intelligent. Because if you put this structure of a committee into a ballot measure, then the voters are the only ones who can change the structure of the committee, which can lead to unnecessary burden and too many asks of the voters to think about things that they don't truly understand or care about, because only certain wonderful people apply for committees and participate so actively. And you guys would know better what it means to run a committee. But essentially it sets up a 21 committee member. I just had a moment. Yeah. 21 individuals who would serve as the committee, and it gives I use the word demographics, meaning that they're allotted to a variety of roles, not necessarily like what we think of as demographics when we're doing like census building. But so Metro gets 3 counselors, each county has 1 commissioner, each city in the region, the largest city in the region, in each county gets to have a seat, as well as 1 city that is not the largest within its across all of the 3 counties. So that's 4 city seats. That's not 6 city seats, that's 4 city seats. In addition to that, they have spaces reserved for State Department officials to sit, only 1 of whom would have the ability to vote. The other 3 would be non-voting members. And then a variety of roles and types of folks. So housing providers, finance, business, service providers. And then they state that Metro will appoint with an eye towards geographic and other demographics to make sure that there's a balance amongst the committee. This is modeled after what is called JPAC, which is their Transportation Advisory Committee that manages the federal funds that come into Metro as the Metropolitan MPO, which I never remember what it stands for, but basically that's a federal designation of, there's a lot of people that live there. And so they get direct funding from the federal government. So JPAC is the model, and this serves as an advisory board back to Metro, who is the finalizer of decisions. So that's H2 PAC in more detail. Next slide. So after we looked at both of these things, we did a really quick rundown of what we thought this might mean for us. So next slide. Always start with the negative. To your point, Dave, there's the unknowns about the revenue impacts are such a big part of this conversation. Because if we're reallocating a significantly lower amount of money, that is a bigger concern of our ability to do either housing or services. And so not knowing what the impacts of indexing would be, so indexing the threshold at which you are considered a high income earner is on the table as part of that transition plan. The new rates, there are new rates that could be implemented by Metro under that 1% currently, and then a new rate and maximum set in future years if the measure passes, and then changes to the allocation. All of those are unknowns for us that could be minorly inconvenient to catastrophic, depending upon where all of those levers sit. The approval of the annual work plan prior to funds being released could create contracting difficulties because we like to do multi-year contracts because we kind of know vaguely that we're going to need services for more than a year. People tend not to be on meeting of services after 1 year of getting them. So that, putting those funds on an annual risk basis is unsettling. And then the amount of administrative work for us as implementing partners, as well as our service providers, through additional auditing, reporting, updating, all of that work. And we don't know if we're getting more money for administration, which is going to reduce the amount of money to go out into the street to meet the goals, or if there's going to be some management by Metro, their portion of the funds to offset some of those costs. We want to put the money into serving people, not doing paperwork, general goal. And then we don't know if they're going to reset the priority populations which is how we have established what our essential systems are. And we don't know if they transition us away from focusing on population A or how to measure that or who fits into population A may fundamentally have to shift our programs. They do state that they want to center the chronically homeless in this, but if you're talking affordable housing as also part of the investment portfolio, it needs to pencil out and services need to sit next to those folks, but also they have to be able, you have to be able to build a comprehensive project that probably can't just serve those at 0 to 30, although that's where we would like to see the resources. So next slide. So end on the positive. Oh wait, no, this is ending on the positive. Nathan, to your question, actually, we did put together a series of other options to consider. Indexing is not something that counties are inherently opposed to. We don't know if their fiscal impact would be so large that we can't take that on. And there is an equity question in there. Sunset extension is always better. It means we know we have the resources for longer. We want to be able to use money for affordable housing with broad flexibility of what that means. And we thought we could until they told us we couldn't. So now we're like, but couldn't you just say we could? But that apparently is not as persuasive as I like to think it is. But what's still unclear is how much is going to be done at Metro versus at the county level and how much that integration goes. And that's a question of what do they mean by allocation. We support clear coordination at the local level, making sure that our committees continue to be able to provide us the information that we need, because while Molly and her team are really good at this work and very expert in what they're doing, service providers sit next to people who are telling them what they need, and they need to be able to have those clear lines of communications at the local level. And making sure that we're partnering with our cities. So we're not double dipping in one investment, we're not overtaxing or overburdening one city or one area within that city's control. So that level of clear coordination is something that we put forward. We see in this a little bit. We're not opposed to taking the SHS Oversight Committee and the TCPD and smashing them together. We're just not happy with how they allocated the seats and the fact that it's 21 members. That's super fun for everyone involved. And then we do support regional strategies and regional performance measures with clear intervals for updating those strategies and measures, because we need to know that we're constantly making progress and we're making sure that we're measuring the right things, and that's where the needs need to be met more often. What we had recommended was those key performance measures and regional strategies had to be an agreement between Metro and the 3 counties, each one of those bodies individually voting to support it, so that there is buy-in from each partner, and that we are not being told this is what you have to do, and we say that works in Multnomah County, but that's not what Washington County needs or looks like. So your key performance measures actually put us further behind the 8 ball. So that would require true partnership and true coordination. That's what we asked for. That's not what's included in the measure. So I'm good at positive right up until I'm not. So that is, you know, some of the places where we do see overlap and work towards a cohesive regional request of the voters. So I think that's the last slide.
Yeah, it's a lot of information. We just have time for maybe just like 2 more minutes of discussion.
I think, so to take us back to something we've been talking about is how can the community help the county, and that aside from commiserating it goes back to a recommendation that we gave, I think, before everyone's time real estate. Like what do you do from, aside from your hard job already, taking on the swaying of public opinion and the bad news that comes out is swaying Metro having to do this to say we need more oversight and we need to take less money if that's what the people want.
Yeah, we've been working through some of those processes. We work directly with a lot of our service providers to kind of talk about the impacts to them in the public space, recognizing that there are folks that have been at the stakeholder table saying, we represent service providers, and then service providers hearing what their representatives having saying, like, I have thoughts that are different. So we do a lot of coordination in that space. We haven't thought about how to use this body. I'm very mindful of like making sure that I am within my boundaries as a county employee, because I work for the board, so I can't necessarily give you more resources than I give them. But there's always the opportunity for public testimony in front of Metro, letters to Metro. We have our letter that we just sent asking for a delay in further conversation and really uplifting the work that we have managed to accomplish in Washington County is on our board's website. And I'm sure that someone around here, the final version just got sent out this morning. This was out yesterday. You can have that and model a letter off of it if that's something you want to do. So a huge part of it becomes, what do you feel comfortable doing, knowing that you have to live and work in this system, and that, you know, don't want to push anyone to go too far. So I think talking to Metro councilors, talking to other people in the public is one of the other key components. We become ambassadors for what we're doing and making sure that, I mean, people might not like what we're saying as a county, and we need to know that too. And that needs to come back to Molly and Melissa and the team so that we can inform the board that, like, you've gone well outside what Washington County, the people want. I doubt that very much. But those are places where that constant set of feedback and then taking it into other spaces of influence that you have, that's another key component to why we do come to the committees to talk about what's happening and what those impacts look like. So,
and we'd be happy to come to other coalition meetings, whatever other associations you may be a part of. We've been sharing our slides with our board, and we're happy to keep sharing those sort of messages. Or again, we've had different conversations. I will say this has been more our Homelessness Solutions Council has been more the lead in terms of our two bigger advisory councils. I think that's worthy of, we'd love to, you know, talk internally, like at what point does it make sense there's a letter from the two committees. That then we just have to recognize that there's our board, you know, what channel we're playing, because we support the board as well. I do it as well as Aaron, and they have to send their own letter. So we actually, at a very minimum, we should send that out to
Yeah, and I think it's like, thank you for the pullback, like thinking about this in terms of what it means for the development of housing is also really important. And that if we do this well, it's integrated, it's not siloed, it's not separated, and creates part of that system with less cracks. At the end, we need enough permanent units to do things, but we also need to have enough resources and not just a, $5 million, so that's going to crack the affordability of development. Sorry, just every once in a while I think about things. And so I think it's important that it's not just service providers talking about impacts to their bottom line, but also making sure that investments that are allegedly flawed, and that's another key component to the messaging that perhaps we may not out there as much as
There's statistics which, are published, typically and been recently newsworthy. But I just wonder, how helpful is the story? I mean, especially the successes that are coming out of our shelters. It seems like a very valuable story that maybe has more of an impact. And is that a good point or a focal point of what we could create in terms of story or narrative?
Yeah, the story and narrative that we are trying to center in this conversation is the people we have helped. This isn't about whether or not Washington County versus Multnomah County is better at our transparency and clarity. It is about, are we effectively finding people where they are and moving them into secure housing at the end of the day? So we do center those narratives about moving people and not just relying on emergency shelters from time to time, but instead having permanent beds. Having the ability to say, you can't stay here on the street, but here's a place for you to go. And it's not jail. Like, those are the stories that we're trying to center in this narrative, and talking about how then we build that part, and then we build the next part, and we transition people through that. And then when they get into housing, that they are stabilized and able to stay in that housing without it being a catastrophic disaster that then disassociates them from trust with the system. Those are the pieces of the narrative that are incredibly important, that I'm ready to move into this unit and stay safely in this unit and not become disassociated from my treatment, associated from the ability to bring in groceries, become what some people, the community of like, I don't want that person living next to me, that you can't tell one unit from another if it's placement into privately owned, not permanently affordable housing. Those are the stories that are incredibly important to be able to tell, that we can't always.
We've got some information later on our agenda. We've got some great, it's a great examples of the way that we're trying to do this work at Equal House. So I'm just going to move us on, but I will say, we'll come back with late breaking news in the Oregonian just this morning. It is sounding like the Metro councilors are contemplating, it's not decided yet, but contemplating moving it to November. So, thank you all for your time. We just didn't know that when we were today. That happened a couple days ago.
Tuesday after I presented to the board, so it's great. That's perfect.
Thank you, Erin. Next on the agenda, we're gonna do a quick look ahead for 2025. And actually, I don't think we need to take a full 20 minutes for this. We can sort of bounce into it and then kind of chew on it for a while. So, and this is another spot where I'm kind of representing BNF here. So as we look ahead to 2025, we just really want to make sure that we're bringing content to this committee that's relevant to the committee's goals and also informs the work that staff are leading. So we had an internal conversation a few weeks ago about what information we're planning to bring to the committee this year, but at the same time, we want to hear from all of you, whether we are considering the right places, if there's other requests you might have, if there's content that you really want to make sure that we're emphasizing or digging deeper into. So with that in mind, I sort of gathered my thoughts. I'm going to share another, this is just a one slide. It should be easy to do if I can find it. Where is the PDF? I have too many windows open. I found it. So this is just one slide that sort of runs through kind of the bigger categories of what we're planning to bring in 2025. Come on. So the first category is bylaws. We mentioned that earlier. I think that's something that we'll probably be touching on at least through the next 6, possibly 9 months. So that's something that we'll chat about a few times. The other categories are more what we bring to you and what input we want back. So standard reports and plans, that's pretty typical. That's going to be our annual PHA plan, and this year is a 5-year submission too. So it'll be an annual and a 5-year PHA plan. Our admin and ACOP are our operating documents for our rent assistance and our public housing MTW submissions. So these are just kind of our typical housing authority reports and plans that with this table. Financial information is another category of topics we'll bring, hoping to start quarterly reports again as we build our capacity. And then obviously talking through budget as we move into that. Context is what I wrote there. I was like, how do I describe the bigger picture, the outside picture, and how that kind of plays into the work we do? So stuff like local measures, like what we talked about today. State legislative updates will be coming around in the next couple of months. The Oregon Housing Needs Analysis is another one that's on a lot of radars. So that's sort of the outer context that informs the work that we do here. New initiatives is another kind of broader topic. I'm thinking new construction. Another example is in rent assistance. We are working to streamline a lot of our waitlist processes. So that might be something that we come and talk to you all about. And then the last kind of broad category is strategies. So we're working on a 3 to 5 year real estate strategy, maybe a public housing strategy. That one's more open-ended. So these are sort of the 6 kind of broad categories of content that I think we'll be tackling this year. And really what I'm hoping to hear from you all, and this can also be extended into next month too. We can talk about it next month as you've had some time to think about it. But what I'm hoping to hear from you all is, are these the right sorts of information you want to talk about? What here do you want to make sure we talk about more? And is there anything here that you're like, you know what, this isn't really our realm? So those are big questions for you all. Does anyone have any immediate feedback on that? Or am I right that February is the time, but a little more. Okay. Okay.
The comment I had was, it's a personal interest, so I don't know if it necessarily fits, but it does seem to be an oversight thing we can help with as well. Is with the strategy and budget, there's a sort of gap in long-term planning there that I don't understand. Like how is the county making these developments pencil long-term? I know that's a struggle for every affordable housing person in the country right now, with interest rates and construction costs and how much rent you can get, how much HUD's giving, and all of that. What's that performer look like?
I think we will be addressing that more under the real estate strategy. So the reports and the planning will not necessarily have that. The ECOP and the 5-year plan and all that for public housing, for our CD public housing, that's a little bit different. That's sort of our relationship with HUD. But the real estate strategy is much more wider, which is in the long term, what are we doing and what do we see happening, not just 3 years, 2 years, because the real estate cycle is so long, but it's like 5 years. And longer term, maybe even 10 years, because a lot of our projects will need to have major rehabs. We still have a portfolio of very, very medium to smaller projects, and very meaty, and that's all in the real estate strategy. The real estate strategy will come back to you, sort of an overall view, but then each of the projects, as a matter of fact, today we have a project that we're coming to you just to give a quick update, and it tells very well with what Erin was talking about, which is the SHS measure and how we're trying to do supportive housing. I could just add, our portfolio performance things what we're looking at as a part of our real estate strategy is how are we performing in the long-term outlook? How do we make sure that the capital and operational needs are being met?
If we could get that before we approve the budget. I think that
This year?
Oh,
This year, it's gonna be a little tight, only because we've got so many different things. Our budget is gonna, actually, I think the draft budget needs to go in by the first week in February. So it's a little tight,
We'll talk
it's
about
a
it.
little tight. But I think what we, on the operations side, are already trying to line up our staffing with what we know is coming up the pipe, and also what is the impact of the SHS measure. So for example, I think it was, you asked also about this earlier. I'm trying to remember, it was somebody in here, about, you know, how the cuts of the Washington County impact. Molly was, what happens is the housing authority, actually, we are, call it a self-supporting entity. We do not require, we have not used a single dollar of general funds. Therefore, for every activity we do, we have to look at it as, what is my revenue? That's going to cover my costs, including all my overhead. Oh,
Narendra.
Yes, this is Narendra. Sorry, can't turn my video. I had a question along the long-term strategies aspect of it. What would be very useful to understand what assumptions the county is making about, especially from a homelessness and long-term needs. Percentage of the population, that unemployment rate, and what happens if it goes up by a point or two in the county area. How will that impact the overall demand and from an overall budget utilization point of view, where does that end up, right? So just a 3 to 5 year window out. Yeah.
Yeah, are you thinking more of sort of general economic context, like
Yes.
the larger economic picture?
That's
Perfect.
correct. In the context of your real estate strategy.
Yeah.
I think let me jump in real fast. I think that ties also that maybe this, I'm not sure if it falls under new initiatives or strategies, but how do we also tie into the housing needs analysis, the unmet needs of the housing production strategies too, that we do as a county, but not necessarily at us as needs, but we work with plans.
And I think, you know, I was just going to follow exactly on that, which is the housing needs analysis and the housing production strategy that the state and the region is pulling together.
Yeah.
But also this is, we're linking a lot of the work we are also doing with a comprehensive plan that our partner in Office of Community Development, Shannon Wilson, her team has also pulled a lot of that data together. So we're trying to, I wouldn't want us to go on a tangent that's completely different from our colleagues, both in state and region as well as, you know, county. So a lot of this is going to be sort of pulling from a lot of different and integrating that so that we can bring the presentation.
So, John, for people on the phone. So what's of interest to me is there's stuff that you give us sometimes is like nice to know, sort of interesting, but how does it relate to what we're doing? And so Martha's like, we just had a conversation here and she was bringing up that some of these requirements that we might have to do, we might have to hire someone else to do it. We might take more time by accounting. So for me, that's educational. So when you bring in the budget, you say, remember we talked about X? This is the consequence of what the counties require. Or you might say, the state housing, we're telling you about the state housing, housing community services. We're showing you what their new program is. And the reason why we're telling you about this is because this is require additional reporting for us in our next fiscal budget. Or this is what they want from us. And then when you talk about that, you say, no, we're talking about X. This is why we told you about this, because this is how it affects us. And you know, sometimes I think these things, occasionally, like maybe your agenda's a little short and we're told something and I walk out and say, how's it really make this committee? What am I gonna do? So it's nice to explain this to me. But I thought the local was full of the agenda because we had 20 minutes to fill up and how's it really relate to what I'm doing on this committee? I'm not very often, but occasionally. Very occasionally. More historically, I thought that way. But, so it's also asking you to give us something then to make the connection. The reason why we're telling you about this is because it's going to affect this, which we'll be talking about later in the year or later in this meeting. So it's making those connect. Does that make sense? It's making-
That's such a very salient point. We need to show the organizational impact, and that's the context setting, because it's good to know we're tying it back into our department level decision when it comes to budget or project planning.
Right.
And I should have mentioned, Erin went through a very detailed overview of the SHS measure. One of the things we are internally looking at is when we are doing PSH projects, we are already assuming we're not going to be able to necessarily use all of the funds internally, meaning go to the SHS and say, hey, I need operating support. Hey, I need rental assistance. Because if we're going to be looking at a slightly different landscape, we still need to provide the services. So how do we leverage what we have to get to call it, seek opportunities elsewhere from the state or from the federal?
Just finally, so I'm sort of saying that we're indicating this because we would like to make a recommendation to the counselors around this point. So we're educating you, because the goal of this is for you to give us support on this point. So we're educating you about this because we're gonna have a vote on this next meeting. I want you to understand what and it's sort of obvious, but it's for me, it just sort of says, okay, I should pay attention. I mean,
Create a little formalized action.
Yeah.
Which is, I think we're at that stage in our committee.
Yeah, no.
Makes sense.
Great. Okay, I'm gonna ask BNF to at least touch on this in February again, just in case there are any more thoughts, but this was really, really helpful. Thanks. Okay, we're gonna move on and pass it over to Jill. For those online, if it gets too quiet, let me know and I'll move the speaker further to the end. We're technically challenged here. And Jill, I don't know which of these PowerPoints you want to start with.
The PSH one
This
first?
one?
And I'm going to have Lisa Barr, a real estate division manager, run through this. This is because we just had the SHS discussion. I think it will be useful for you to hear what we're trying to do on the housing side and how does it, help integrate together with some of our homes. Lisa, thanks, Jill.
Good morning. So I'm here to talk to you about a Forest Grove permanent supportive housing project that we are revving up at the start line for right now. And this project, you can go to the next slide. I'm going to give you a project overview, talk about the project status, go over our acquisition considerations, next step, question, and feedback. As background, there was another property in Forest Grove that was purchased in 2022, I think. And that property, we've determined, while it's a great property for affordable housing, isn't the ideal property for permanent supportive housing. And so we will be, so we've decided to make a shift to this property, which you'll see as I show you its location. It just makes more sense for this property. Next slide. Okay, so this is an overview of the property. It's located on Elm Street in Forest Grove. I do want to note that we're actually still kind of in the we're still negotiating the PSA. And so this is information that we're not widely disseminating at this point. The property is HOP will be the developer of the property, and it is in collaboration with Central Cultural and Care Oregon as our partners on this project as a part of the Oregon Permanent Supportive Housing Program, which Leslie and Laura and other staff attended for a 5-month period to train our staff on permanent supportive housing. So this property is located on a commercial corridor, and it will serve population A, namely households with disabling conditions that experience or are at risk of prolonged homelessness, which in Washington County are mostly single adults and couples with high supportive housing service needs. The focus of the targeted population remains in the Latinx community, which represents approximately 30% of the Forest Grove population and 50% of the population in neighboring Cornelius. Hawk secured an LOI for the property purchase at the end of December, and the site is 67,000 square feet, which is 1.54 acres. It's one tax lot, generally flat, which we love, rare to find, and currently contains one small building, age unknown, which is a former or currently used automotive repair shop. So we do anticipate some environmental research on the site, and an asphalt parking lot, and then unimproved land on the northern portion. It's anticipated that the project would include up to 60 studio and 1-bedroom units. Currently assumed at 45 studio and 15 1-bedrooms, with rents regulated at 60% AMI, which is allowed by OHCS, but of course for the residents, just depending on their income, and as subsidized through rental subsidies or operational subsidies. Next slide. Okay, so maybe you could go a little closer in on this. I don't know if you can. So this site is actually located on a major corridor, and it's close to key amenities, including a TriMet bus stop with frequent service, shopping at Weimar, Safeway, and Goodwill, and various Forest Grove medical services, Pacific University, and the Open Door Access Center in Cornelius. And I believe also a library and a senior center are also close by. So we think that the location is very good, considering that this population often doesn't have their own vehicles. They need to be able to walk or have access to public transit. Next slide. So here's where we are today, just not even a month from executing the letter of interest, and we're negotiating the purchase and sale agreement. I believe we've come to final terms with the owner of the property, and now we will go to the board next week for approval to enter into the purchase and sale agreement and conduct everything necessary to purchase the property. We've determined preliminarily that the site's suitable for residential development, but that is contingent on the phase 1, the soils, a review of any hazardous materials documentation, a zoning evaluation, which we've done a preliminary. It seems it's a zoned community commercial, which allows for residential. And then we're in the midst of financing. So we applied to financing through the ORCA process to OHCS. We get kind of a special road in for the folks that participated in the Oregon Supportive Housing Institute. We're the second project that applied. So we're second in line. So that's really great for us. And we'll be submitting all our materials to them in the coming weeks. We, in December, the board approved a concept endorsement to be sent to Metro, which we also submitted in December. December was a busy month. And the Corporation for Supportive Housing, as a part of the institute, there's an endorsement that they need to give the project, and we have to submit $1 million documents. And so that was also submitted in December. So really our biggest lift coming up in terms of the financing is going to be the OHCS application. And we're finding everything we have and getting the due diligence complete so that OHCS can give us a funding commitment. Big picture right now in terms of timeline, we're looking at construction will start in 2025, late 2026, early 2026, end of 2026. Sorry, but we have to be done by 2028 due to the Metro funds. So I do want to just specify the Metro funds are not part of our original affordable housing bond funds. They're an additional allocation of 6.74 million that was a part of our intergovernmental agreement, and they're specifically for permanent support housing. And we did have a deadline by the end of the year to be able to have a project for that and a submittal for that. So we were kind of a little close, but we made it happen thanks to Joe. So, Joe was the person behind making all this happen. So next slide. So these are acquisition considerations. We have hired Housing Development Center as our acquisition consultant. So they have been conducting the due diligence and assessing the site, making sure we can get to acquisition. We need to make sure that we address funding, schedule, and community. So as some of you know, there's a history here. When the first row site was proposed, there was a lot of feedback and conversation with the community. And so this site was actually recommended at that time and not pursued. So there is the revisiting with the community that needs to happen from our team regarding this change. I think the community will be happy about it, but I think there's probably more to talk about. Our timeline, again, we're looking to finish up. Metro's currently reviewing. They have a 30-day review period, so probably by the end of the month, we'll get some initial feedback and questions from them. Due diligence is underway. So as you know, the phase 1 and phase 2 and all those take 6 to 8 weeks. And then uncertainty of findings, typo there, but we want to make sure that the environmental issues at the sites are ones that we can remediate and ones that we can remediate within our budget. There is a special Metro environmental remediation fund that we are also going to be applying. So that's next slide. So our next steps are to complete negotiations of the PSA, which we have, seek Cabot's approval, complete any remaining due diligence, and as I just mentioned, the fourth bullet is to complete our funding application to OHCS. And I'm super excited about this project. It's 100% PSH. It's only the second 100% PSH project in the county. The other one is Heartwood. And then we have some carve-outs in other projects, but it will be important for us to really work through what a low barrier PSH project looks like to understand operationally what needs to be met, but to know that 60 is a big number and a big dent in addressing homelessness in Washington County, and we're looking forward to partnerships as well, which will include really exploring how Medicare and Medicaid can be leveraged for behavioral health at the property, and that includes partnering with our colleagues in the behavioral health care county, which addresses it's really strong relationships there. With that, next slide. Any questions or feedback from Pat?
So your operators are on board already and are able to staff, like they know they're going to be able to staff the project.
So we still have to identify a supportive services provider for the project. So meaning someone with a specialty in behavioral health. So that is a gap that we haven't identified yet.
It's paid for by Medicare, Medicaid, and what sources of funds do you have And is that the big thing? There's the real estate side, and there's the ongoing support service side. So how's that fun?
The ongoing supportive services, when we apply to OHCS through this Permanent Supportive Housing Institute process with the capital funds that we're applying for. We're also applying for rental assistance for all units, all 60 units, as well as the supportive housing, supportive services fund. OHCS follows what the metro region provides for supportive services. I believe in my office, it has set it at 15,000, and I think up to 17,500 for families and for specific communities of color. So if we're able to access that kind of level of support, that should help our building. We may still need to supplement that because what we are finding is, for example, in the Heartwood, even with the rental services as well as the supportive services, the needs of the building itself, like security,
Dave knows all too well. Dave could speak to this.
Dave, yes.
I think, are you asking for our sources and uses? Or
No, that's like, not necessarily, you get this, it's always the big thing in these things is you have to make it build it and how you keep it going with the same service level. I mean, usually those things they give you maybe at the most 5-year commitment on dollars, and I don't know.
On the OHCS, it's not. I think they give you a commitment for, I have to, I'm sure, I think it's like 10 or 15 years.
Okay,
I have to double
it's
check.
usually hard to get really long-term commitments on these things.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's why we went with the OHCS versus, the ARLA, because ARLA is a short at this moment.
That's the
Yeah, you answer the question, but you don't, that you lose that, then what happens is it starts falling on your general fund, trying to figure out how to keep funding this stuff.
It would all go back to SHS, which circling back to earlier.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question about Heartwood, because it's kind of a case study to look at, so how is, do you have a report on Heartwood, how things are going?
We can put it on the agenda, and Leslie Johnstone is our asset manager. She's been the one a lot, on the ground, working with the property management company, working with the service providers.
Open to having that discussion.
Oh, Narendra and Nathan? Did they? No. If there's no questions, but it would be useful because we're going to go next Tuesday to the Housing Authority Board of Directors for this to be able to execute the PSA. If you approve or endorse our actions, that would help with the management now.
Yeah, so if someone has a motion to endorse this project, it's a nice bonus.
Motion to support the housing authority on this project. That wasn't the motion.
So that was.
Okay. And then second it. Discussion.
It's our first one, I'll stay on here. So-
Right.
Yes.
And then any discussions? Around that?
So you'd be moving through the PSH Institute in 25.
We
Assuming.
already did.
Oh, you already did it.
Yeah, last year.
But you
From
still
March.
have to send your behavioral health care partner. So it's-
Yeah, it sounds like it's a much needed project.
Yeah, there's not as much message on Western than.
So we will vote. at this
Yeah,
point.
we've got a motion and a second, so I will host a vote on this. All those in favor of endorsing the housing authority on this project, please raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? Thank you. Perfect. No opposition or abstaining. So we have passed that. Thank you. Perfect. Jill, did you want me to move on to your second PowerPoint presentation?
Sure. I'm going to just go quickly through some of our affordable housing projects. You may have heard about our AHP phase 1 and phase 2. The first one was was a 5-project resyndication of about 330 units. The second one was 260 units, phase 2. This is just a quick update, and I wanted to let you guys know we had a big cause for celebration because on December 15th, we met TCO for phase 1, even after a big fire in one of the buildings in Aloha. And that delayed our TCO by almost, I would say, easily 4 months plus. But we still met all of our timelines with our investors. Also, thanks to Leslie, after each TCO on 12/31, we had placement, all of the units, leased up placement service. So we did not have a single write down on the equity. All the way until December 31 at what time was it? 3, I think it was 2 or 3.
That was phase 2.
Oh, phase 2. Okay. We had both of them because we had, as you all know, for tax credits, everybody loves New Year's Eve. It always happens. Okay.
TCO's temporary certificate of occupancy permit for the
Yes.
that is.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, the acronyms in the industry can get kind of.
Okay, and my notes just left because my computer's shutting down. I'll bring it. Next slide, please. And okay, so we're just going to go through a quick overview of the 2 projects. I'll whip through a bunch of photo montages of before and after of the phase 1 and phase 2, so you guys just see what it used to be like and where it is now, some of the next steps and questions and feedback. Next slide, please. This is the key. Sorry, I need my glasses and I didn't bring it. So you'll see on one side, the left side, is the total number of units and the projects themselves. Bonita Village, the original Capitol Mountain, and I'm going to move up. Villager Apartments and sorry, I have to move up. I can't see from there. Aloha Park, and they're all different units. The project closed back in mid-2022. As we mentioned, completion 12/15, fully leased up 12/31. Total project cost, including acquisition, was over 40 million. Total project cost was 140 million. Acquisition was 40. Construction was over, I believe, 50. That's where my notes would help. On the right side is phase 2. That is a resyndication of another 5 properties. The largest one being Holly Tree, 140 units. Parkington Square, which is right over on 2 blocks away from us, is the blue building. That's 48 units. Cornelius Village, 14, Amberwood, and Merrill Terrace. And the project just closed end of 2023. We're already at about 75% completion. And all the partial lease up, thanks to Leslie, were met for our New Year's Eve. Next slide. And here's Bonita Village. You can see on the right side. So on all these photos, the right side is the before, the left side is the before, right side is the after. So a lot of facade work, both interior and exterior. Next slide. The Ridge at Bull Run. This is just one of the buildings. Again, left side is old, this side is right. And you can see again sidings, a lot of difficult doors and windows. A lot of work on that one. This is just one of the multiple buildings on that site. Next slide. Same with Villager. This was everything was taken down on the exterior. I think a lot of these also has some water damage. Next slide. You'll see this at Parkside, and there are some balconies that needed changing, again, exterior and interior, as well as landscaping. And on the right side is where it does look like right now. Next slide.
I am apparently just so slow. There it is. Come on.
This is just one of the buildings over at the lower part. I did not bring the building that was burned down. That was really depressing because it went all the way down to the studs. There was almost nothing left. You can see here, it was quite a big difference in terms of the upgrades. Next slide. And this one is, these are now phase 2 with Holly Tree. Holly Tree is a one single unit and it's 140. You'll see complete roofing, interiors, exteriors, the whole works. It's mostly seniors, and in the back, in that sort of S-shaped bark, it's actually some drainage to support the area. This is honestly. Next slide. This is the one that's right here on Hillsborough, when you drive into Hillsborough. This one is also completed now. It had tremendous water damage because of the balconies. It was a unit that's 100% seniors. So again, interior, exterior, completely revamped. Next slide. And this is the Maryland Inn. This one is also, you can see ADA, sidewalks, everything was completely redone, interior, exterior. This is also, I don't remember, this is not a senior building. And I think that may be it.
Yep.
There's 2 other projects. We don't have the before and after because they're still in the middle of construction. Any questions? Comments?
So making presentations on this 6 months now or a year from now to the community. I assume we have, I'm sure this is the beginning, but I wonder how it actually panned out in the end. Rehabilitation total costs versus constructing from new. And I think in addition to preserving units, which was a big thing, I'm assuming there was a calculation that this was a more economically efficient way than building from scratch.
Yes, there was.
And that just might be a number that I think people, as you present the community, want to be able to say, we preserved X.
Yeah.
And we save this much to the community by doing this versus new.
Yes. And a lot of what we see in these acquisition we have, when we talk about the total cost of the acquisition, it acquires the existing building, and part of this is to generate tax credits. So it's not money coming out from the housing authority. In phase 1, we did actually put up substantial money, I think, and we're still writing those checks because part of this is when we put in and closed in 2022, we had a certain interest, construction interest, and in the projections. Right? Over that last year, 2 years, interest went up by over 100 basis points. So we're just bleeding. So we want to convert to perm. John, you'll know what I'm talking about when I say conversion to perm. When I say conversion to perm, it will mean that we will bring in the permanent loan, which is much, much lower costs than the construction loan. I mean, it will save us over, I think, $200,000 a month just on interest. So Lisa and I and Leslie are just working really hard to get that conversion to perm done. And we're targeting it, I think, for maybe April. Because we need to show 3 months of stabilized rent, all the income, and the debt service coverage on all of these. Correct. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
I think it's, we're trying to, get you guys real life projects to respond to. I think it'd be great to, I'm sure we'll get,
crisper around how that ties back to our larger budget or larger organizational values, but also specifically what we will want, what specific impact we want from you guys, because you guys do lend so much expertise and you always make us better. So thank you for all that.
Perfect.
Thank you all.
And with that, we are done. Like, do I need to say anything special? No, I think we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
15 seconds.
I'll make it up next time. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You all.